Alright, so let's go with kind of a quick status, kind of day 2 status. Recap, which I never gave you in the first place. You know, this is not a 100-point restoration of a 2003 KTM 450 EXE, but it is a, buff and shine and clean up and make sure we're good to go because I want to sell it. And I want to make sure whoever buys it, gets a good bike. So I want to give it a once through to make sure everything's solid. The only thing that I know is a little wonky is there's a leak out of the carb bowl. I'm kind of wondering if the gasket or maybe there's an overflow valve or something that's kind of stuck open. So I'm going to be pulling the carb off here shortly. And other than that, there's some damage to the plastic that doesn't look great, and actually, like that post, this one, and this triple clamp, or the handlebar holder, is actually from a Scott Stampener, which I want to put on another bike. So I'm going to take those pieces off of the KTM so somebody doesn't wonder what the heck, what's missing. Yeah, and other than that, it fires, it runs. A year or so ago, I did the valves on it, got it all functional again. It is plated, actually, in the wonderful state of Wisconsin. And we'll get around to kind of updating all that. But in general, things are pretty clean. It's not perfect, but if I was buying a dirt bike and it was this clean, I'd be pretty happy. Dirt bikes get dirty, right? Front rim's all tidied up. Over here on the back half of this thing, we have the sprocket off of it, but more or less tidied up. Looks reasonably clean. Parts ready to go back in. We'll do that relatively soon because I don't want to lose all those things or get them mixed up with anything else. So actually, I think the agenda will be, let's put the rear wheel back together so that all those pieces are in their home and where they really need to be. It'll also clean off my workbench a bit because we're gonna yank Mr. Carburetor, throw him up on the bench, take him apart, make sure there's nothing wonky going on in there. Again, the only thing I know of is the leak, which I suspect is a gasket or maybe a overflow valve stuck or something. All right, so we'll get to work. Back in a moment. All right, so this back tire. Let's get these guys out of the way so you don't knock them on the floor or anything silly like that. Not that that's something I'd ever do. All right. And Mr. Tire. Alright. Since we're not going to be doing too much craziness, I'm just going to let that rest on the bearing on the far side. And go about getting our sprocket installed yet once again. This, I know I don't have any. Originally, for whatever reason, I'd used red Loctite on this thing, which made it a pain in the butt to take out, of course. But these things were not going to come off. There's still a little bit left on the thread, so we're going to go ahead and count on that for the time being. My sprocket's not in great shape. It's got a little bit of buildup on the front of the tooth, but I've seen worse. All right. And spinning everybody back in place. Maybe this can be one of our ×2 or ×4. At the same time of trying to video things, I'm also playing around with iMovie on a Mac, and I'm trying to learn how you splice things together and segment out and run things at different speeds. They've got all kinds of audio filters and video filters that you can use on it. So I'll play around with that a little while later. I was doing that this morning in the kitchen for the first time. And if it's not obvious, which it should be, this is kind of the first time I've ever played around with things with the audio aspect of this. I've certainly played around with motorcycles enough over the years. And it's funny, when I was a kid, everything was 10s and 12s. Now it's 8s and 13s. I can't get wrote about that change in the world, but it happened. It's here. No biggie. Alright, so. Alright, so dialed up there. Those parts are out of the way. Could put this back on the bike at this point, but I think that's going to make life a little bit more awkward while we've still got the subframe off. So that's going to go on the floor for the time being, and we'll come back and be on the carb here in a minute. Actually, I'll probably video taking the carb off. Alright, so first thing to do to get this carburetor off of here is we got to disconnect the throttle cables. So this little cover. Simple enough. Of course, we got to get the throttle cables out of there. Probably should back those nuts off so we can get a little bit of slack. Those are 10s. Whoops. We already just spun ourselves. Okay, we'll go back and off. We'll go back and off. Actually, there was one spin, didn't they? Didn't just get those insiders. Okay, so. And we get enough slack down there to swing that guy around. Tucked in there. That should just as easy. There we go, one. And it's true that I can't spin that guy out where he comes down and off. And get all nice and lined up. Alright, those are disconnected. Yep. Get that big old crankcase vent, that's not going to cause headaches. We've got our little electrical guy on the other side, so let's flip you around. Back again on the other side of the bike. This little sensor needs to get unplugged. And hopefully it'll come off without me cussing. Hey, it did. I didn't have to cuss. I only have to cuss a lot. Alright, loosen up the clamp, which I think has already been broken loose. It has. Alright. Now, subtle encouragement, half twist, kind of an Olympic move, and there we go. Ta-da! Carburetor. Back over to the table. All right. So, carburetors. Always like clean spots. And I do have. That's almost too big, isn't it? Almost too big. You know, I guess we are gonna rearrange for just a moment. All right, back in the game. Ooh, somebody found the exhaust pipe, didn't they? That will not do. I'm not sure about that one, so. Sand cutters to the rescue. Just on that section. Keep that for posterity. Alright. And we're going to clean up the outside of this guy a bit. Finished getting all the gasoline out that I thought I had gotten out before. Carb bulls sometimes hold more gas than you think they will. Luckily this, I think it's a Kenya carb. One of their flat-tide versions from circa 2003. It has a handy-dandy drain on the bottom of it, so we just got rid of all that. Alright, and we've got all the hose and tubing all over this thing. Which, with 8mm hose clamps, we could take off. Or can we just swing it out of the way? Because what we really want to get access to is the carb bowl. So I think as we pull these things down, we aren't going to worry about pulling off everything. We'll just swing them out of the way as we can. Those two will come off, these two will come off. They'll be up there while we're down here. Alright, and these little guys are pounds. Shockingly enough, they're the ones that I actually have on my ratchet. So there's that. I'm going to pop that off. We're going to have access to the floats. And this was engine side. Miss Drool was coming out this side is what I remember. So, let's pop this guy open and see what we see. In case anybody's ever wondering, and I'm sure you figured it out by now, I am not a professional mechanic. I am a dirt bike mechanic. I've been wrenching my own bike since I was about 11. I've never really done anything amazingly stupid. I have to admit the pinnacle of my stupidity was probably 75, no, it was a 74 TM, so I would have been 13, maybe 14, after splitting the cases on it, and I can't even remember why I did that. Had to have been a bearing or something, right? But when I buttoned everything back up, not really understanding kind of the nuances of a transmission, put it back together, stupidly fired it up, rode up the street, first, second, and whatever I shifted into next locked everything up solid. At which point I tore the engine down again, pulled the jug off it, took it up to my local Suzuki dealer and said help. And they got everything functional again. I subsequently have done split cases and played around with transmissions, most recently on a 79 Husqvarna. I'll get a video of sometime, or at least photos of it. It wasn't a restoration, it was really a will it run kind of thing. It's actually kind of fun because I worked on that for a month or two, and a friend of mine here in Evanston had started a motorcycle show called the Evanston Motorcycle Classics. And I literally buttoned that thing up on a Saturday afternoon. It hadn't run for 30 some odd years. Again, I'd split the cases, there was bad countershaft bearing in that one. Put everything back together after tidying it up and of course going through the carb and everything else. And I've got a video of that on a phone. I should throw that up on YouTube too. Literally kicked it 2 or 3 times. It popped. My friend and I looked at each other like, holy smokes. Another kick or two and it fired up. So I was actually able to ride that through the streets of Evanston, making more noise than any other motorcycle that day, because it was a WR, but I pulled all the packing out of the silencer, so it sounded like a motocross bike. And got that thing running and rolled it up there. A lot of fun. My dad bought that bike brand new, and in '79, I've got a photo of me somewhere on it in the backyard doing wheelies. And he foolishly let me race that a few times, and if anybody remembers Blackwater. All right, so this guy's apart. My suspicion was bad gasket, but this is an O-ring, and it feels like it is sealing all the way around. So I'm not quite sure where the leakage was coming from. Yeah. Unless there was just schmutz kind of around here. We got a little bit of debris in here, so I'm going to go ahead and pull this thing apart and see if I can tidy it up a bit since I'm in here. Make sure that nothing's floating around that shouldn't. And I'm gonna pause for a moment to kind of sort this. Back in a sec. All right. So as you can see, I've got the carburetor apart. There was a little bit of schmutz kind of down in the float bowl. We tidied that up a bit. And I've got the floats out right now, and what I could have been seeing before might have also been the needle valve or the float valve getting stuck. So more gas kept coming out of the gas, out of the tank into that and coming out an overflow tube, because the gasket actually looks like it's in pretty good shape. So I think I'm going to spend a little time pulling the jets out, making sure they're all nice and tidy, getting any grit or anything that I find floating around down here tidied up. Ethanol in the gas can, and the gas I think nowadays is evil. I'm not a specialist on this, although I did have to replace the petcock that goes into the gas tank on this KTM years ago, because there was a plastic filter that stuck up into the tank that had kind of deteriorated is probably a better word, because it wasn't metal, it was plastic, and it essentially just kind of crumbled. And I'm going to write that off to the evils of ethanol in our gas. My totally scientific opinion of that. In other words, it's a wild ass gas. All right, so I'm going to tidy up here for a little bit. I'll turn this on and get a few more shots as I go. But I'm not going to make everybody suffer through this because there's going to be a little bit of futzing and playing. All right, touch base in a second. All right, after a bit of fitzing and futzing, this thing's back together. Sorry about the gap on the filming, but I kind of went nose down. Sometimes it happens. Tidied up the outside a bit. At least got the crud off it so it looks like a carburetor. And cleaned up the float bowl, the jets in there and everything got tidied up. So I'm hopeful that that leak was either the needle or the float valve, or that this bowl wasn't seated well. Excuse me. Yeah, and being that this is the day before Thanksgiving, that was my friend who was so kindly invited me to his house. So I needed to take that one. All right, so inside's tidied up, hoping that the bowl has seated itself well with the carb body, or that the float needle has doesn't hang, to try to get rid of that gas strip. Won't know until I actually plug it to a gas can or a gas tank and fill it up, or get it on the bike and try to start it. I'm not sure which way I'll go. Could put it on the bike and start it without an air filter and an exhaust pipe, but good Lord, would that be loud in here. So I'm not quite sure how I'm going to verify whether I got that little leak taken care of or not. Unfortunately, I didn't see a giant smoking gun, but hopefully we've got it. We'll touch base in a bit. I'm going to clean up the back of the engine right now where the carb fits in, just so I can get to it and get a little bit of the crust out of there. Then we'll get the carb put on and start tidying everything up and putting things back together.